This is RinglerRadio, where you get all the latest news and information about settlement solutions, litigation, mediation, and structured financial security from Ringler, the largest and most experienced company of settlement consultants in the United States. Ringler has been helping injured people and their families since 1975. RinglerRadio is made possible in part by American General, Liberty Mutual, MetLife, Mutual of Omaha, New York Life, Pacific Life, and Prudential. Now join Ringler Radio host Larry Cohen.
Well, hello and welcome to Ringler Radio, everyone. I'm Larry Cohen, the head of Ringler Northeast Operations, and we're glad you could join us today. Well, with the public spotlight now firmly shining on the opioid crisis in America, here are some sobering facts. Over 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses related to OxyContin and other prescription opioids since 1999. The difference is that these drugs aren't being cooked up in meth labs or smuggled over borders. 60% of opioids come from doctors' prescriptions. And according to the American Society of Addiction Medicine, 4 out of 5 people who try heroin today first started with prescription painkillers. And the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention report that 145 Americans now sadly die every day from opioid overdose. And to talk about the crisis and his recent groundbreaking litigation against the pharmaceutical industry is our special guest, James Boffetti, Senior Assistant Attorney General of New Hampshire and the Chief of the Consumer Protection and Antitrust Bureau. Jim and his colleagues recently filed a 95-page complaint against Purdue Pharma. So with that, welcome to the show, Jim. We're very interested in hearing what you have to say today, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. This is an important issue, and I'm happy to talk about it.
Terrific. And joining me today as my co-host is my friend and Ringler colleague, Peter Early of Ringler's New Hampshire office. And with that, I'll just say welcome to the show, Peter. Welcome back. You've been our co-host on several of these shows. We love having you on.
Thanks, Larry. It's always fun to be on Ringler Radio. I'm looking forward to it.
Great. Well, as long as most of us can remember, drugs were seen as the scourge of the inner cities, but now they seem to have broadened their reach, and New Hampshire is a prime example. And that's why we've invited its Senior Assistant Attorney General, Jim Boffetti, to help us understand it. But before we talk about the important legal action that you've taken, Jim, why don't you give us an overview of what you think is happening out there in the drug culture and what's going on?
Well, great, thanks. So I think you cited one of the more important facts here. 4 out of 5 people who migrate to heroin or fentanyl on the street start with prescription opioids. And so what we have seen in this country is aggressive marketing of these opioids over the past number of years, significant over-prescribing of opioids, and people who are taking them for chronic pain for long-term uses are finding that they're becoming addictive, that the medication is becoming less and less effective for them, and eventually they get shut off from their doctor, and they go looking for other sources. And so they go to the street, they go to heroin, and as I think we know, heroin today is being mixed with powerful fentanyl, and oftentimes the user has no idea what the percentage of fentanyl is, and if it's a significant percentage, then that person is at very high risk of overdose deaths. So we've seen in New Hampshire a significant rise in drug overdose deaths. We have about 500 a year. And for a state this size, that is really devastating. This is an epidemic in New Hampshire. Per capita, we are the second highest rates of drug overdose deaths in the country.
No question. Wow, that is startling to hear.
So Jim, as this crisis continues to escalate, obviously there's been a lot of research done and people trying to get their arms around the problem. Andrew Kolodny, who's the co-director of the Opioid Policy Research Collaborative at Brandeis, and who works with opioid addicts, has said that the shift in prescribing trends is what's created this crisis. The CDC says that opioid prescribing has quadrupled since 1999. And in August, the U.S. Surgeon General wrote an open letter to physicians asking for their help with this urgent health crisis and linking the crisis to deceptive marketing. The New Hampshire complaint states that Purdue Pharma intentionally misinformed the medical community about opioid risks way back in 1996. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I sure can. So the complaint that we filed, which was the result of a lot of investigation, talking to a lot of New Hampshire prescribers, looking at stats from New Hampshire in terms of how much of these drugs are being used and prescribed and paid for by state dollars, it became pretty obvious that this company was very successful in changing the culture of opioid prescribing. They figured out that they needed to create a market for long-term chronic pain users. And historically, those people would not have been using opioid therapy because I think we've known for centuries how addictive this drug is. But Purdue was successful in very aggressive marketing of this and convincing doctors that their products were safe and effective for long-term chronic pain users, people that had migraines and back pain, and they did that through a whole variety of strategies. They had a lot of marketing studies. Some of them we allege in the complaint were biased and were false. They hired reputable pain specialists who touted the benefits of opioid therapy. They visited hundreds and hundreds of New Hampshire prescribers every year and convincing them how safe and effective their products were. And it worked. They were able to vastly increase the market and the sales for their products. And in doing that, they made opioids generally a much more accepted therapy and oftentimes a first course of therapy. Instead of trying other kinds of alternate pain treatments, they were pushing opioids as the first course of treatment for a lot of these patients. And this is where we are now.
Well, it's interesting. You talk about how physicians are prescribing these things, and as a response to the marketing, I personally had a situation where, just like you said, I had a back issue, and we were going away for the weekend, and we went to get a few of those pills, and lo and behold, what we wanted for like 3 days to make sure I got through it, the doctor prescribed 50 of the pills to me, and so we had a bottle of 50 pills. I took 3 or 4, and then everything cleared up. My wife ended up crushing the remaining pills. She was like paranoid about it, flushing them down the drain. But to be prescribed 50 pills when I'm really only needing 3 or 4 was a real signal to me that there's something wrong out there.
And I think you'll find that that's very common, that people that go in for routine procedures for tooth extractions will come out with significant amounts of opioids. And so everybody, it seems like, has opioids in their medicine cabinets, unused opioids. But some of those people use them on a regular basis, and they've been using them for years. I've talked to a number of people who have called the office, and many folks will tell you that they have been using opioids. I mean, in our complaint, we cite that in 2014, 2 million Americans were addicted to prescription opioids.
Amazing. And that issue of the leftovers being in the medicine cabinet, that's just an open invitation to those who are seeking them to go rummaging through. So that's one of the reasons why everyone's got to be very vigilant about all that. But Jim, your complaint stated that Purdue Pharma knew that its marketing of opioids was false and misleading, and that the company concealed its misconduct and used false research and trivialized the addiction. And this information came in part from former sales employees at Purdue. And, it sounds eerily like what transpired in the tobacco arena. So what exactly is the remedy you're trying to obtain from the litigation based on all of those factors?
Well, this is a case that's been filed, so we're in the early stages, assuming that we get to a point of a court saying that, yes, we have proven that they have violated these statutes, and we have a number of claims in our causes of action in our complaint, then we would be looking for this company to essentially fix what they broke, to pay for treatment, to pay to make sure that doctors get the correct, precise message about opioid prescribing, and to basically abate the nuisance that they've created. I mean, it's every city and town in this state is dealing with first responders who are going out on calls. There's all kinds of costs associated with this epidemic, and that's stuff that they should fix, because we believe it was a result of their deceptive marketing that this overprescribing, that this crisis epidemic is now facing the state.
So even though that Purdue has obviously gone a long way in exacerbating this crisis, if you go to their website, it says, "We are acutely aware of the public health risks that these powerful medications create. That's why we work with health experts, law enforcement, and government agencies to reduce the risks of opioid abuse." What's your assessment of that?
Well, I can only speak for New Hampshire in that, and one of the things we allege in the complaint is that they consistently failed to report to law enforcement or to the New Hampshire Board of Medicine suspicious prescribers. And they had an obligation to do so, but they didn't. In fact, they kept selling pills through those prescribers when they knew that they were problematic. And I think this is probably fair to say that this was happening around the country. So I've read the same claims, but in New Hampshire, that's just not what they have done, and they have not been a constructive force for trying to deal with this addiction crisis. I don't see where they're actually doing something to abate this crisis.
Well, it's not very surprising, I guess, and maybe that's the essence of what the litigation may finally come up with, that the truth will come out. And what's really been different about the opioid crisis in my eyes, and I'm sure in a lot of others, is that unlike a lot of other drug scenarios where things happened in the dark and in shadows, the public has actually been seeing the effects of this. I mean, there's been, I'm sure you know these situations where parents are shooting up in the car and their kids are. What are some of those kinds of public situations that are causing people to shake their heads? What have you seen out there?
Well, I mean, you almost can't go a day without picking up the paper or hearing on the radio some story. There was a story recently where a father brought his young son into a restaurant, and the father went into the bathroom and began overdosing, and the child actually had to go to the wait staff and say, "I think my father is in trouble." And so they called first responders, and they had to administer Narcan, which is the reversal drug, to revive this father. I mean, that's scene. I mean, there were people in that restaurant. There's a lot of commotion going on, and it turns out that that's what this is. And I think that if you talk to local police, they would talk about how they have to check out public parks for used needles, and they have to. There are people that are passing out on grocery store aisles and on park benches. And people see that, and the police respond to it. Some police forces will tell you that they go and administer Narcan to the same person multiple times in a couple of days, because these drugs are so addictive. They create such an impulse for addiction and for use that it's very difficult to manage. I mean, I was a defense lawyer for 14 years before I moved to the Attorney General's office, and I represented hundreds of clients who had an addiction to heroin and opioids. And I can tell you, those are the worst cases because that addiction is very, very difficult to overcome. Mm-hmm. And many, in fact, most people who fight that addiction relapse. It is a lifelong process because it changes brain chemistry in people, and it creates such a strong addiction. It's hard, I think, for those of us who haven't experienced to understand how powerful that addiction is.
Probably often tough to get paid, too, I guess. It's tough to deal with that population for sure. Well, let's take a quick break right now, and we'll be right back in just a minute with more from Ringler Radio. We'll be right back.
This is Ringler Radio, brought to you from Ringler, the nation's leading provider of fair settlement solutions. Did you know that Ringler is involved in a third of all structured settlement cases in the country? Ringler advisors work with all the parties in a lawsuit settlement to find the best possible financial solution for the people involved. Everybody wins. There's a Ringler consultant in all the major cities of the U.S. No one has more experienced experts in the settlement business than Ringler. Check out our website at www.ringlerassociates.com for the best information for injured parties, attorneys, and claims professionals to find the Ringler advisor nearest you. When it's your interests at stake in a lawsuit settlement, you want only the best, most objective financial plan. You can count on Ringler advisors to create a customized plan that meets the financial needs of you and your family for the future. Visit RinglerAssociates.com to learn more.
Welcome back to Ringler Radio. Glad you could join us. I'm Larry Cohen, your host, and joined by my co-host, Peter Early, and our special guest, James Boffetti, Senior Assistant Attorney General in New Hampshire and the Chief of Consumer Protection and Antitrust Bureau. And, of course, we're talking about the opioid crisis in New Hampshire's groundbreaking litigation against one of the makers of OxyContin. Jim, there are multiple counts in the New Hampshire complaint against Purdue Pharma, and what are some of the important ones that we maybe haven't spoken about yet? What else is in that complaint?
So, in addition to the unfair and deceptive acts and practices, which is a violation of the Consumer Protection Act, there's also a claim of unfair competition. So, for example, OxyContin, it was marketed as a 12-hour dosing drug, and they did that because it gave them a significant advantage as they were marketing it. You could tell your patients you take this drug twice a day. Unfortunately, for many patients, they did not get 12 hours of pain relief. We allege that Purdue knew that and that they stuck with that 12-hour dosing. In fact, told prescribers to have patients take a higher dose every 12 hours as opposed to taking it more frequently, which only increased this sense of euphoria and then this sense that it's just not working, and greatly exaggerated the addiction risks. So that's part of it. They're all sort of related, but that they did these things that created a competitive advantage for them, that created an unfair competition in the marketplace. That itself is a violation. We also allege Medicaid fraud because we believe that their false statements about addiction and other things led to the state making Medicaid payments to these chronic pain patients that they otherwise probably would not have. We allege public nuisance, which we've talked about a little bit before. We've alleged unjust enrichment, and we've also alleged there's fraudulent and negligent misrepresentation. So those last ones are sort of common law claims that you can make, but they're all related, and there's a common theme here, but it's just going at it from different angles.
Jim, you mentioned how bad the opioid problem was in New Hampshire specifically, and I know that throughout the state, you're not going to find many people, myself included, who haven't been touched by this personally. I've unfortunately lost friends and family both in New Hampshire, but also throughout the country. I know it's a nationwide epidemic, and other states are taking aim at Purdue as well. Right now, there's a multi-state investigation into various opioid manufacturers that a bipartisan coalition of 35 state attorneys general launched in June, and congressional and Senate investigations are underway as well. Can you discuss that a little bit more?
Sure can. So we were actually instrumental in starting a multi-state group to look at this opioid problem. And I think there's a large number of states that are in the investigative phase. There are also about 10 or 12 states who have actually brought lawsuits. So they're litigating states, New Hampshire now being one of those. And so because of the way that litigation works, once we actually begin litigating, we step out of the multi-state group. But we're still obviously in touch with other states. We're working with them to the extent that we can, because we all have a common purpose here, and that is to find out exactly what happened and to hold any wrongdoers responsible for what they did. I think you're going to see more lawsuits filed. States have been filing pretty regularly. Alaska filed recently, as did South Carolina, and I think you're going to find other states are going to jump into that because, this is a case that probably needs to go to trial. I think the facts really do need to be explored in a way that only a trial can do, and I think we are very anxious to be able to present the evidence to a court and make sure that people begin to understand exactly what happened here.
Jim, the president has now called the opioid crisis a national health emergency, which I assume allows access to more federal funding. And that's always going to be a good thing for all of us trying to fight this. And I also heard you say earlier that maybe some of the outcome of your litigation would be some additional funds to be able to help with certain aspects of this, and mostly around the educational aspect. And is that the ultimate antidote for the problems we're talking about? Is it education? I know it's almost like a three-pronged. There's a criminal nature. There's a lot of people want to talk about criminality. Others want to talk about treatment, and then there's an education umbrella that's over all of that. What do you sense where is the country headed in the direction of which of those aspects?
Well, I hope the first aspect, the most important aspect, is treatment, because if there are 2 million people who are suffering with opioid addiction, I think the only realistic response is to find a way to get them off those drugs, and you can't do that cold turkey. So I think having many more treatment resources available, so that if those that want it can get it, and it's good treatment, should be the first priority. That mixed with education. New Hampshire has done a lot of good work in revising the prescribing guidelines for opioids, and other states have done the same thing. So there's education of patients, there's education of prescribers, there's a much greater awareness about how to use these drugs. We're not saying that these drugs should not be used. We're saying that they should be used properly, and that those who use it and prescribe it should understand clearly what the addiction risks are, and maybe explore other options for pain relief before they move immediately to opioid therapy.
Yeah, as you said, these drugs do serve a purpose. It's just, unfortunately, there are so many unintended consequences that have happened. And it's not just, Purdue. I know earlier this year, the New Hampshire Attorney General's office reached a $3.2 million settlement with the maker of another opioid, a fentanyl product called Subsys. The company in that litigation was Insys Therapeutics. Can you talk a little bit about the scope? What's the current action compared to the case that settled earlier this year?
Well, the case against this was a company called Insys Therapeutics that made a spray form of fentanyl, highly powerful form of fentanyl called Subsys. That's a different case because that was actually a kickback case where we alleged that the company was paying kickbacks in the form of payments to prescribers to get them to prescribe off-label this very powerful form of fentanyl that was only supposed to be used for breakthrough cancer pain, and prescribers who received these kickbacks were actually giving it to patients who didn't even have cancer. So that was a different case. We acted quickly to go against the company. We reached a settlement. Some of that money has gone into treatment in New Hampshire. We're very glad that that's the case. This case is different. So this is a deceptive marketing case, here's the important point. I think oftentimes I've heard Purdue say that the issue really is the abuse of their drug by people on the street, and I want to talk about how dangerous is this drug for the person who uses it as prescribed, because a lot of the patients, a lot of the people we've dealt with have people who just took the drug that was given to them by their doctor in the dose that was recommended by their doctor and became addicted. So what was the risk for those patients? It's not a question. Yes, I'm sure this drug is being abused on the streets. There's no question these pills are being sold on the street. But I think the bigger problem are the people that take it as the doctor tells them to take it, get addicted, and then eventually find that they have to take more and more of this drug in order to get any relief, if any relief at all, and then they migrate to street drugs. So that's the difference, right? These folks were just were taking what was prescribed. Now, tobacco. There's been comparisons to tobacco. Tobacco, you go in and you decide to start smoking. No doctor is prescribing tobacco. But in this case, these patients were being prescribed it and just followed doctors' orders and found themselves addicted.
Well, it's interesting. In the tobacco arena, it was almost a cultural thing where there would be advertising which would make it seem cool, and people would maybe gravitate to that for those purposes. Here, it looks like it's a much more incentivization of physicians to prescribe maybe larger doses, or as you said in the substance case, where it's a money issue that typically is involved in this arena. So what do you foresee, Jim, as we wrap this up? Do you foresee tighter controls on the size of prescriptions that doctors are going to be able to give to their patients? Is there anything there? Or what is your hope for the best outcome of this whole Purdue litigation as we move forward? What do you want to see?
I do think there's a change in culture, and already there are limits on the amount of these drugs that can be prescribed. And let me just say, most doctors, are really trying to do the best thing for their patients, and they want to alleviate pain, and they have an enormous amount of goodwill. But they were told things that were just not true by this company. So I think we need to go back and this company needs to correct its misstatements, and then we need to talk differently about what is the appropriate use for these drugs, and limit the number of drugs that can be given at any one time. There's a lot of work already being done with that, and educate the public. So that if your doctor does write you an opioid prescription, if you have wisdom teeth extracted, you might want to say, gee, doc, is there anything else I could take besides an opioid? I really don't want to use opioids if I don't have to. That whole change of culture, I think, is what we're really hoping will happen in the long term.
No question. And for the tooth, I've always found a shot of whiskey helps a lot, is what I thought. Well, with that, I think this has been a terrific show. I think we've learned a lot, and hopefully you've been able to get the message out, too, as to what's so important about trying to solve this real crisis that's really just painful for all of us. So if someone wanted to get a hold of you, Jim, or talk to you or ask you any questions, how would they reach you?
So they can certainly call me at the office, and I can give the number. It's 603-271-3643.
Okay. And is there a website? I think the Attorney General has a website.
Yep, there's a website for the New Hampshire Attorney General, and if you go into the Consumer tab, there is an email that goes directly to the Consumer Bureau, and they can send an email to me that way.
Terrific. And Peter, if someone wanted to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
Well, the phone number at my office here in New Hampshire is 603-423-0055. Or you can find my contact information or any of the other Ringler Associates at our website, which is www.ringlerassociates.com.
Well, that's exactly true. And as Peter says, the website is easily reachable, and it has all the Ringler associates around the country for structured settlements or anything else you might want to need a Ringler associate or a broker to help you with. And the other thing I want to mention is that site has a lot of great information on it. I encourage you to go there because we're always exploring new arenas around the litigation area. And, of course, we'll be talking about this opioid issue as well. And, of course, if you want to go on that website, you're going to see all the Ringler Radio shows that we've done, and you can reach these radio shows either on that website, ringlerassociates.com, or you can find the radio shows on ringlerradio.com, legaltalknetwork.com, or you can go to iTunes and download the show right from iTunes and listen at your leisure. So with that, I want to say, Jim, thanks again for being a great guest and a very important topic.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And Peter, again, great co-hosting.
Great to be here, Larry.
Terrific. And for all the rest of you out there, go have a great day. Thanks.
The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by, Legal Talk Network, its officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, and subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer. Thanks for listening to Ringler Radio, celebrating more than a decade of podcasting and over 2 million listeners. Think of Ringler, the objective settlement advisors with more than 140 consultants in 60 cities nationwide. Visit ringlerassociates.com today.